In 1968, at the Democratic National Convention, as everybody knows, there was a riot. Demonstrators had gone to Chicago to demonstrate against the war, had gone to demonstrate what they thought the hypocrisy of the Democratic Party was, and to basically disrupt the convention. On the second day of the convention, there was a riot. I mean, all hell broke loose. And the newspapers reported that the demonstrators were the rioters. But all the reporters who were down there and in the street knew that it wasn't the demonstrators who had rioted, it was the police who had rioted. Actually, the police lost control and started beating people up and throwing them in jail, including reporters. So the reporters went to their own editors and said, hey, you got this wrong. And the editors wouldn't budge. They kept with this mainstream establishment way of looking at what happened in the summer of 1968 in Chicago. So a bunch of reporters in Chicago got together and said, we're going to put out an alternative publication to let people know what really happened. And they started what was called the Chicago Journalism Review.
In the 69, right after the convention, very early 70s, I don't know how, but I got a hold of an issue and I said, that's fascinating. And why don't we do something like in St. Louis?
And it was the first of a couple of dozen journalism reviews that sprouted up around the United States in the next 3 or 4 years. Really an alternative look at journalism by journalists. And that's what happened in St. Louis in early 1970. A bunch of folks got together at Charles's house and said, we don't like what's going on in mainstream journalism and we need to critique it.
It's not so much a criticism of what has been published, although we do this, but what has not been published. The sins of omission to me are always more prevalent than the sins of commission.
Lasted because they were geared mainly to two things, the anti-war movement and the civil rights movement. And when both of those things either cooled off or went away entirely, they had trouble readjusting their editorial focus. But their biggest problem, of course, was financial. And none of them were able to survive financially, with the exception of the St. Louis Journalism Review. It's the only one of those journalism reviews founded in the late 60s that still exists. And the only reason it still exists is because Charles underwrote it. He, out of his own pocket, paid for it for 25 years.
We would put the kids to bed and go back downstairs and work. It was 16-hour days, and there was always things to do. Fortunately, I never kept a spick and span house or felt it was necessary.
I can't think of anyone more interesting than Charles. Charles is one of the nicest, most pleasant, and yet one of the sharpest people I've ever known in my life. If you just knew him on a friendly, casual basis, I don't think you would understand how intelligent the man is, how he can narrow in on issues, how his thinking is fresh and insightful. Jews who had the means to get out of Berlin and out of Germany were getting out. Charles's family didn't have those means, and so barely got out by the skin of their teeth. Getting out, however, was only half of the problem. The other half of the problem is, where do you go? And by that time, the United States and Britain and other Western countries had a pretty severe quota on the number of Jews they were taking into the United States. There was a Japanese enclave in China, in Shanghai, that had been occupied by the Japanese. It was in China, but the Japanese held this like protectorate along the coast of China and inland too. But Shanghai was one of the cities that Japan held, and there was a Jewish ghetto of German Jews in Shanghai during the Second World War that had been arranged by the Japanese. He went to high school in Shanghai while American bombs were falling around him. And when he graduated from high school, he got on a tramper ship and came to San Francisco. I think that it gave Charles a breadth of understanding, a depth of empathy for other people that is difficult to acquire when you grow up in a world that is safe and comfortable, and you're worried about what model car you're going to buy instead of where you're going to get your next meal, or who's going to take you off to the concentration camp.
My calling, I should have been a grave digging man. I believe I missed my calling, I should have been a grave digging man. See, I dug my hole so deep and wide, just don't make no burial place. Nice warm hole I'm in here, it's full of snakes and vermin of all kinds. Ain't no nice warm hole I'm in here, it's full of snakes and vermin of all kinds. Some come at you from the front, others get you from behind. So far down below grade, I hardly ever feel the sun. I'm so far down below